Find out how to be a volunteer with the City of Deltona, coming up next. Hi, I'm Lee Lopez with the City of Deltona. Welcome to Turf Courts and Celebrations. Today we're going to talk about being a volunteer with the City of Deltona. My guest with me today is Marlene Brown with the City's Parks Department. Marlene is the Executive Assistant and she's also the Volunteer Coordinator for the City. So Marlene, volunteers with the City, that is probably like the lifeblood as far as helping get things done.
It is.
So as a volunteer, what do volunteers do with the City?
Well, without volunteers, a lot of our events wouldn't be as successful because we need them to help with the many tasks that each event requires.
Well, like when you say events, okay, like say Spooktacular, because that's a fairly
Spooktacular is our
big
biggest.
event.
It is our biggest event.
Okay, now a volunteer, what would volunteers be doing?
Well, there's two nights. The first night, the Friday night, we don't really have a family night. It's more trails. So we need at least 50 to 80 volunteers on Friday alone just to be actors on the trail because we have different scenes. So they're positioned in different scenes to scare the visitors as they go through.
Okay, so that's like with an event. But there are also other volunteer I say organizations, but other volunteer responsibilities, like with different boards and subcommittees. Like say the Parks and Recreation, they have their own advisory committee.
Right, we have 4 boards.
Okay.
We have the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board that's made up of 7 volunteers appointed by the City Commission. Under that board are 3 advisory boards, 3 subcommittees, and those are also made up of residents. Because you have to be a Deltona resident to be on those boards.
Okay. So if somebody wants to volunteer, say an adult, what are the requirements that the city is looking for somebody to volunteer? You know, like whether it's with an event or it's on an advisory committee.
The requirements are different for a volunteer for an event.
Okay.
So if you want to be a volunteer for an event, we have an event form. Matter of fact, I have a copy here that shows you the form. This is the volunteer interim application form that they can download from our website.
Okay, and the address is
www.deltonafl.gov.
Okay.
And then what they would need to do for ease, just for visibility, they'd go to the Parks and Recreation page.
Okay.
And then to this side, we have park links.
Right.
They would look for downloadable forms.
Okay.
And then once you get to downloadable form, it would take you to this page.
Okay.
And then they would print the volunteer interim application form. That's the form that's needed, which is this form.
Okay, and that's if somebody wants to
volunteer for an event. Now, right. Now, an adult can sign their own form. But if you're a minor under the age of 18, then your guardian has to sign the second page. And this is just for events. Now, to volunteer for a board, they would have to go to the city's website.
Okay.
And on the home page, I believe it's where it is. The city clerk has a section there for board applications.
Okay.
They fill out the form online and submit it directly to the city, and it goes to the city clerk's office, and they have to specify on that form which board they want to serve on. If there's a because we advertise the vacancies, so it's 2 different forms for the boards. A different form for the board and for just events.
And with an event, that's like essentially that's a one-time only because that's just for the event when it occurs.
Right, but for Halloween especially and Extravaganza, which is in March, around a week before Easter, I usually have the same students wanting to volunteer, so I keep their application on file unless something changes, then they don't have to fill it out again.
So, like you said, unless something changes with their application status, like unless they move or whatever, like say a student, they can apply one time
Right.
at the beginning of the year for an event, and then that application stays on file, so they can go ahead and
Do other
volunteer.
events for the year.
Okay. Now, as a student, you said that there's another benefit.
Right. The students, they need at least 100 volunteer hours to graduate from high school.
Okay.
So when they come out to work, they usually bring me 2 forms from the school.
Okay.
This form states the date they work, what they do, and how many hours. And I have to sign off on this because I'm in charge of the volunteer program for the city. If they don't have it in blue, they can bring it to me in the white copy. It's the same form. And then they also have to bring me this form, which they complete, I complete, and their parents complete. And these all go back to the school. So when this goes back to the school, the school knows that they worked, and these hours are logged in against them towards the hours that they need for their graduation.
Okay. So all the hours that a student would work, it didn't matter what, event, or if it's on a board, that they get hours that are credited back to them for community service.
Right. And the Youth Advisory Subcommittee is made up of teens ages 14 through 18 or through their graduation. They get those hours for the board sent to school as well to make up their 100 hours. So they get, whoever is on the board can get double the hours that another person would get if they're just volunteering for one event.
Okay. Now, with students or children, is there like a minimum age?
We prefer not to go below 14.
Okay.
But for some events, if we have parents who are going to be there at the event, say for argument's sake, Halloween.
Yes.
On the second night, which is family night, we have games. And if a parent volunteers to work with their child, and the child is 12 or 11, as long as they're together at the same game where we know the parent has control of the child and can keep an eye on her, then him or her, then we would allow the child to work.
Okay. Now, as an adult or a child, say they want to volunteer. They want to be a volunteer with the city. And like you said, there are forms that are online.
Right.
Kind of walk me through the process. Like say, a child wants to, or a high school student, they want to volunteer to be on a board. What would the process be? Kind of like a step by step.
Those would still go through the city clerk's office because it's a board. Sometimes, though, with the youth board, which is a little different, I'll send the forms to schools, Deltona High School, Pine Ridge, and University. And we're now asking for a teacher recommendation. So we get those students from the school. So those applications sometimes can come directly to me without going to the city clerk's office, but then I would in turn inform her. So that's the only board where there's a little bit of a difference between the other boards.
So they would go, like you said, with the students to apply for the Youth Advisory Board, you would coordinate that through the school.
Right, we actually send the application to the school so the student can complete it and drop it off, or the parents can bring it in, and that's how I usually get those back.
And if they want to volunteer, adult or a child, to like say help at the 4th of July.
Right, then they would do the event application.
Okay, online, fill it out and submit it.
They can download it, and they download it. That one is not printable, so not writable, so they'd have to download that one, fill it out. Or we even have them in the office, they can pass by just to pick it up.
Okay, so then once they fill it out, then they bring it in and they'll hand it to you, and then they're on the list.
Right, and also interesting thing to point out here, important thing to point out is that we do take people with disability because we make accommodations for them. Like for Halloween, if a disabled person wants to work, we make sure we give them something that's easier, something where they can sit. They don't have to do a lot of bending or moving. So there is opportunity for a disabled person to volunteer. Okay,
now there are several departments that use volunteers. I know that the Parks Department uses volunteers, and just very quickly, excuse me, I know our Planning and Development Department, they have volunteers, but they're board members for the Planning and Zoning Board.
Zoning board. Mm-hmm.
And I believe the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. And there's another board that is not, I think it's with the clerk's office for the scholarships.
The William Harvey Scholarship.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's another one with the Economic Advisory Board that, I said, even though those aren't associated directly with the Parks Department, but they're still boards that use volunteers. Okay, so with the different boards, I said the Parks Department, you have your own board, and then you have your subcommittees. Mm-hmm. With these other boards that use volunteers, even though they're with different departments, those members are still volunteers who apply to the city through the clerk's department, like what you had said before.
Right.
Now, with the events, 'cause I want to give people an idea of, because events, when you think about it, they're really a lot of fun. I mean, you kind of get caught up in the moment of the event. For, I believe it's Extravaganza. I think that's the first event.
That's the first one.
Now, like you said, Extravaganza, that precedes Easter. That's the city's Easter celebration festival.
Right.
If somebody wants to volunteer, and also what I was going to ask you, like say Extravaganza, usually that's like in March. If somebody wants to volunteer, is there like a deadline for them to get in touch with you so that way they can, be on the list?
Yes, because we have to plan ahead. Because for Easter, the amount of students, we prefer students for that one. The amount of students who sign up determines how many games we put out. Because we have to have the games manned 2 people per game. So if we don't get the volunteers, and it restricts the amount of games we can put out for fun stuff for the kids to do.
So like with Extravaganza, because I said that one, it's always a cute event. It's a very family friendly event.
Yes.
Usually, how many volunteers do you need for that event itself?
That one doesn't require more than about 30. And I'm usually getting the kids from the school, so I'm fortunate with Extravaganza.
Okay. Now, as a volunteer, like you said, they'll operate the games. Is there anything else that the volunteers do?
Yes, we have 25 to 30,000 eggs that has to be spread in different areas, different age groups, because we have prizes within the eggs, and they have to be spread by age group. And we usually use the students to do that, and that's done before the event starts. And once the eggs are down, then those same students have to stand guard around the edges to make sure that the kids don't get too excited and start picking up before we start. So they're assigned there until it starts. And once we start the egg hunt, then they leave and go to the games or to the bounce houses if they're manning the bounce house. And they stay there for 3 hours.
So, and then the next event that would happen in, I guess, the city calendar, is it the 4th of July?
4th of July. That's a huge one, and we run games for the younger kids. So there again, we also need quite a bit of workers, because that determines how many games we put out, because it's 2 people per game, because the lines are usually very long.
Because even though 4th of July, it's just one night, but from what I remember with the previous events, the number of attendees, it can be anywhere between 18 to 20,000 people.
Right.
So how many games would you be looking at as far as like setting up?
We try to put out anywhere between 10 and 20 games, depending on, as I said, how many workers we have. Because sometimes we have to use city employees to help if we don't get enough volunteers from the community.
So with the 4th of July, primarily volunteers would help with all the games for the younger crowd.
Right.
The next one, and I believe this is a new event that the city's doing, is the Festival of Nations.
Right. We just started that this year, so hopefully it will grow and will be better next year. So with the launch this year, we didn't really need the volunteers. That was mostly done by city staff. But depending on what happens next year, if we decide to expand it and offer entertainment for the kids, then we would need volunteers to run some of those games in conjunction with the festival itself.
Now, if I can ask, okay, because like you said, Festival of Nations, that's fairly new. This is 2015 was the inaugural year.
Right.
very briefly, can you describe, it's a multicultural event, the first for Deltona. Can you give me just a little bit more detail about it?
Well, what we were going for, even with the food vendors, the event was catering to different cultures, different nationalities. We had the Philippines, we had Africa, we had the States, we had India, we had somebody from our group from different countries showcasing something from their country, whether it was dance or music or playing an instrument. So that's what it was. And the food vendors were similar. We had one-of-a-kind food vendor. There was Trinidadian, Indian, American, Italian. So we had the food vendors to go along with a theme of international then,
So, yeah, because I went to the event this year, and I said it's a slow start, but it was good. It was enjoyable. Now the next event that we have that takes place in City Calendar, that's the big one. That's Spooktacular.
Right.
And that is a two-night event, and that like you said before, that requires that asks
a lot
for a lot of different volunteers. What can people expect? Like, say if they want to volunteer because it's either games or it's scaring people, depending on what they're doing. So give me, an idea. Say if somebody wants to volunteer to help out with the games, and how many games typically do we do?
Again, 10 to 20. And those lines are unending because the second night is when we kind of have up to 20,000 people come through. And there are a lot of younger kids because we have the costume contest and the pie eating contest. So you have more people at that event. So we try to run as many games as we can. And we saw how crowded the lines were this year. So we're trying to see if we can expand that next year. But without volunteers, it would be hard to really do some of these things that we do.
Now, that's just with the games. Like you said, there are anywhere from 10 to 20 games, and typically 2 people per game.
Right.
But where I guess it's like volunteers would have more fun is being volunteers and scare actors on the trail. Give me an idea, or describe that.
You'd be surprised. I would think only the kids would like that, but there's a lot of adults who really enjoy being an actor on the trail. So they come out early. We provide a makeup artist who paints their face to match their costume, which we also provide for them to wear. So they get the makeup to match their costume, and then they go off, and they really have a good time. They have a great time on the trail.
Now, it's also, it makes for a long day, or rather a fairly, it's not something that would be done in 2 hours, because when they show up, typically it's in the afternoon.
Right. They show up at about 5. We provide them something to eat. They get their makeup done. They choose their costume. They hang around. And then before it gets dark, we have one of our officers take them on the trail to give them a tour of the different scenes so they can decide ahead of time where they would like to be stationed. And then once it gets dark now, then they take their places before we open the lines to the public.
Now, I guess because it is kind of fun, do you ever have a waiting list of people who want to volunteer to be on the trail?
Sometimes we have a lot. And if they come in too late, then that's where we'll cut it off, because we have to know in advance how many people we have, So I usually cut it off a week before the event. So the latecomers would get in if I don't have enough volunteers. I try not to turn anybody away, but sometimes you can have too many, especially for Halloween.
Now, to properly man the haunted trail with enough scare actors, what are you looking at as far as a number of people?
Anywhere from 30 to 60 volunteers. So that takes a lot. And then in addition to that, we still need another 30 to 40 to run the games.
Now, and because the scare actors are interesting to that, as many times as I've been down the trail, does the city prompt them as far as what they can do, or do you just let them let their imagination
Right.
take hold?
The only thing we caution them with is to be careful not to touch people as they go through, because people will react. So for their safety, we just encourage them not to get too close where a frightened person can, flail or hit them. So that's the only thing. But they're free to do what they want. And most of them really do love it.
Yeah,
they come out at the end of the night and they have no voices,
Oh, and now this is also a holiday, but it's completely different from Spooktacular, the Christmas parade.
Right.
Does the city typically use volunteers with that?
The Christmas parade, we use the volunteers for the Santa float, where we mostly need elves.
Okay.
So grown-ups
Yeah.
and kids alike can volunteer to ride on the Santa float. The other responsibilities are usually delegated to city staff.
So you would see the volunteers and they'd be with Santa Claus on the very last float.
Right.
Okay, because I've seen in the past when you have people on the float, youngsters, there's some adults, and you wonder, okay, are these some, who knows who to get on the float, but they're volunteers.
Right. They still have to complete the form and submit it. And if they're underage, the parent has to sign it, and I do check to make sure that it was signed by the parent, because sometimes kids try to sign their own forms.
Oh, well, to get on Santa's float, I guess you'll do almost anything.
Yes.
Now, and speaking of Santa Claus, the other big holiday event that the city puts on each year is Santa's North Pole.
At the Deltona Library,
and
yes.
That, from what I remember, is fairly volunteer heavy as well.
Right. As a matter of fact, I just recruited volunteers to help with the decorating, because decorating is a 5-day event.
Wow.
So we have people help to put up the trees, decorate the trees, and there's a lot of scenes. So each scene is different.
Yeah.
So we have people staged at different sections to help Crystal put that up. And then on the actual day of the event, we have somebody who clicks we call it the clicker. That's how we keep track of how many people actually come through. So we need somebody for that. We need somebody to help Santa. We have arts and crafts table. We need 2 people to man that. We keep somebody at the door to make sure the line stays in order and that we don't overcrowd the room. And then we usually have teens stand throughout the scenes, because little kids will try to take the lights down or do things. So they try to keep control to make sure the scenes stay the way they need to for the entire evening. So yes, all of our events are volunteer driven.
Right under the Parks Department.
Right.
The primary is the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee, and from what I gather, for people to be on that board, they need to be appointed by the commission, correct?
Right. Their names get turned in, and then the City Commission every December will appoint. It's one person per district. They get appointed to start in January, and the terms are now going to 2-year terms.
Okay. Now, the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, what do they do? I mean, because people may ask, okay, it seems kind of obvious, but what are some of the duties that they perform?
Well, that particular board, a chairperson is chosen. 3 chair people are chosen from the Parks Board to be the chair on the other 3 boards: the Senior Advisory, the Citizen Accessibility, and the Youth Advisory. Their job as a board is to make recommendations to the Parks Director about things that could be improved in the parks, or things they want to get involved with. Like, they just decided to adopt one of our parks this year, so they actually clean a park every month. So they do that as their way of giving back, in addition to volunteering, and then they make recommendations to the director, who in turn take these recommendations to the City Commission.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the 3 subcommittees: the Senior Subcommittee, the Youth Advisory Subcommittee, and Citizen Accessibility Subcommittee. The Senior Subcommittee, our Advisory Subcommittee, what are the duties that one would usually have on that?
They try to do things catering to the senior community. Like, they do a Valentine's dance, they do a senior breakfast, and the arts and crafts festival under the City of Deltona's Parks and Recreation Department. And their project this year was to come up with a directory of services that cater to the seniors. You know, medical services, transportation, daycares, all of that. So that was a big project that they worked on this year.
Now, the other one on the opposite end of the age spectrum, the Youth Advisory Subcommittee.
Right. They try to come up with ideas or events that would cater to teens in the area. Their goal is to find a place for teens to go to keep them off the streets so that they can, you know, have an indoor supervised party or a game night. So they're teen focused.
Okay.
And then they also give suggestions on what we could do to bring in things that would benefit them.
Now, I've seen some of the members of the Youth Advisory Subcommittee. They've also volunteered. I mean, in addition to the regular volunteer, you know, with the committee, they've acted as waiters at, I think it was the Valentine's dinner and different
the
events
senior
like
breakfast. They go in and they actually help to serve the seniors or whoever is at these events. So they get more involved because I try to pull them into all the volunteer events that we have going on.
Now, with the Youth Advisory, you'd mentioned the youngest they can be is 14 through graduation. Is there like a median age typically? Is it like mainly like, you know, seniors or?
Yes, I've basically gotten between 15 to 18.
Oh, okay.
Is what we have, and then we also have the citizen accessibility.
Yeah, now that one is to me exceptionally important simply because of the issues that they want to make sure that they're resolved.
ADA issues, yes. They did a video on ADA parking.
Okay, with all the volunteers, they're donating all their time. They're doing all the you know, a lot of the work, but the city recognizes them how?
Yes, the city does every year in April, which is volunteer month. There's a week designated for volunteer appreciation, and during that week, each April, the city hosts an event where the volunteers come in and we wait on them. You know, we let them relax. We recognize them, they get awards, we feed them, we entertain them, they get gifts. We just want them to know that without them, we couldn't do what we do. And that also makes them want to continue because they realize that they don't go unappreciated.
Marlene, thank you very much for being my guest today. This is Turf Courts and Celebrations. Thank you from the City of Deltona to everybody who's volunteered and who wants to volunteer. See you next month.